Greetings and welcome to In the Trees, the cannabis, gardening, and lifestyle podcast highlighting methods, products, growers, and breeders from Maine, the East Coast, and beyond. I'm your host, Mr. Roots, and I'm stoked to deliver you the lowdown on all things cannabis, presented not just for the well-vetted OGs in the garden, but for those buying a seed pack to grow their very first garden. This show is especially for those buying their very first cannabis to try. If you are listening in your car, sit back, relax, and strap on your seatbelt. And if you are listening in the garden, turn us up so you can hear us over the fans. Sending out good vibes from the rock-bound coast of Maine, we are In the Trees. In the Trees Cannabis Podcast would like to thank the Maine Cannabis Chronicle for sponsoring the show. If you haven't had the opportunity to check out their magazine, you should ask your local caregiver store, dispensary, or grow store if they have a copy of it. If they don't, request that they carry it. The Maine Cannabis Chronicle is a great source of knowledge on all things related to the high-quality herb here in Maine. This is a beautifully edited, full-color, well-done magazine full of captivating articles from some of the best in the business today. Grab a copy and give it a read. Welcome to the first ever In the Trees podcast episode, and thank you all for tuning in. For this first episode, I am excited to introduce you to someone who is a very well-respected person in the cannabis field, and who has been referred to on Instagram as Maine's best-kept secret, Sean from Melting Pot Farm. It was a pleasure to sit and chat with Sean. He is about as humble and real as they come in the cannabis scene today. This guy is a veteran in the garden and has been holding it down in the woodworks here in Maine for a couple of decades. He has grown and worked a bunch of the elite East Coast cannabis strains, including the Maine Super Skunk, the Real Deal Sour Diesel, and an exclusive cut known as Underdog. This interview is part 1 of 2. The second part will be dropping soon, and I think you're going to love it. It is equally, if not more, a great conversation than this first one. If you are unfamiliar with Sean or Melting Pot Farm, check him out and give him a follow on Instagram at Melting Pot Farm. Well, all right, let's get it going then. Roll up a joint, put that torch to your banger, or pack a bowl. Then take a sip of some fresh, cool water, because here comes the fire.
I got started growing cannabis as a late teen based on my want for cheaper access to better cannabis. And I didn't want to have to continually be dealing with the people I was dealing with to obtain my cannabis. And I was lucky enough to find some seeds inside of some pretty good cannabis that I had sourced. And from there, it just made sense for me to try and put them in the ground and see what would come of it.
Do you think those were S1s, or do you think they were, maybe someone didn't clip a male with those? Or hard to tell, huh?
Yeah, those specific seeds, looking back, I would assume were cross-pollinated, feminized, or S1, just because it was from what we considered Canadian hydro back then.
Right.
But it was, for me, it was a good source of what I considered.
Were these some beasties?
Yeah, good beasties, though.
Yeah. Oh, right. People
there were
talk
good
a lot of shit on
back
them.
in the day.
Yeah, no, there definitely was.
Relatively, at least.
Yeah, right. I mean, not like today's herb, but
No. Hey, back then you were pretty spiffy if you had them.
For sure, yeah.
Yep. Cracked some S1s in Dixie cups behind a file cabinet in my bedroom, and I got caught very quickly.
Okay.
Came to a crossroads in my life, and my mother said, the words that I still hear in my head now, I hear, "You're going to burn the house down. Take those things and put them in a closet, would you?"
That's great advice.
Yeah. Instead of telling me to throw them out, instead of grounding me, she said, "What are you, crazy? You don't put a light behind a file cabinet. You're going to burn our house down."
She progressed your growing right there,
She
right?
could have put the stop to it, and I would be, I could be a shoe salesman right now.
Well, from the closet, obviously, things kind of changed after that, Oh, I need more space probably was the next, yeah.
Very slow and steady, but...
Back in the day, a closet was something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I worked off of a generous, we'll say 2 feet by 3.5 foot closet, 4 feet tall for years as a teenager. And I see these warehouses some guys run, and it's like, wowzer.
Yeah. I'm glad we're not in such tight spaces now, though, because controlling heat was always an issue. And as we know, as a result of amped up heat, a lot of times different things move in.
Oh, yeah.
These bastardly spider mites and stuff.
Oh, yeah. That was a way of life back then. If you didn't have if it wasn't crackling and popping, you weren't doing it right.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely think that some of us OG growers have good... we know a bit more about IPM as a result of all that stuff back in the day.
Yeah. It was a long, steady progression of learning it. These days, it's, you can just kind of Google IPM and it comes right up. But you had to go through the trenches a little bit more back then.
For sure. So how'd you get started with breeding the plant?
Again, I think it was just, it made sense to me to, it got into the point where I was purchasing seed packs, and back in the early and mid 90s, seed packs were extremely expensive. There were only a few spots you could get them. And, I took a trip to Amsterdam in my late teens. I goofed somehow accidentally. When I got home, there were some seeds that had found their way into my bag, and I was lucky enough to have friends, and we traded some seeds. So by the late 90s, I had a nice little collection of some stuff to work with, and it seemed to make sense to multiply them.
Yeah.
After putting, the risk and the time and the money into the few seeds I had on hand, it just really made sense to back them up and have a bigger lot to search through.
Right. What were the names of some of those strains that made their way back here, luckily?
Yeah. We had Sage, we had Blueberry, we had White Widow from Greenhouse, Scheherazade we had.
That one's a legendary strain right there. Yeah.
A lot of names that, some of them have lived on and some of them kind of vanished, but they were more popular back then. Yes, Blueberry and Sage, White Widow, White Russian, which was an AK-47 White Widow hybrid.
I had a great cut of that back in the day, man.
Yeah.
I loved that one.
That was my first expensive seed pack, and the day I grabbed that seed pack and I actually had it in my hand, and it was no longer just a picture in the magazines. It was it was important.
Nice.
Yeah, so from there, just lucked out. The first seeds were accidentally put together, and from there we just kind of have kept it moving.
Do you prefer to flower from seeds or clones? A lot of people kind of seem to go back and forth with that. There's a lot of chat in the forums about, some people like to pop seeds, call the males, and flower out the gals. Or some people like going from clones.
I generally go from seed. Nice. Right? A lot of it actually comes down to, what's my goal? I usually ask myself that before any venture. What is my actual goal? Let's work my way backwards from a goal. So if I were, if I had hundreds of seeds that I'm looking for, one specific special thing, then I'll be very aggressive with my culling, Mm-hmm. Now, that same question you asked, if I only had 8 seeds that were extremely special to me, I may go about it in a completely different manner. I may have them all backed up multiple times before I ever flower them. I may want to see if they have any different tendencies to show phenotypic difference from seed or from clone. A lot of it comes down to the value I see from the number of seeds I have to start with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, if you're doing, if you just want to see what something's capable of, and you have plenty of seeds, then those traits may show up again. Yep. And most of the time they do if you're doing a big sift. But.
Yeah, so if I have my own seeds where I have thousands of them in the fridge, I'll be a lot more picky.
Yeah.
Say I have, access to a very special 10-pack, I'll give them a lot more time to prove themselves.
Right. Do you maintain a library of cuts?
I have for over a decade, have held onto a pretty elaborate library of clones. And I just recently have let that go, you know? Yep, I've let it go as it's something I've always loved. It's something I enjoyed more than most of the rest of gardening or seed making or cannabis production. It was, making sure that it was almost like a rescue, but for cannabis plants, making sure there was pre-clone sales on Instagram, $50 extremely exclusive clones that can be shipped across the country or the world. There was more of a feel where you weren't keeping them to hoard them or to keep them exclusive or keep them away from people. It was more just keeping them in a safe home where they're not going to fall off and just disappear.
Right, because there's plenty of them that you may never see again.
Yeah, so the urgency was different. Even 5 years ago, where I still had a relationship with those clones, where I had an urgent feeling to keep them in a good, safe space. They allowed me to go to sleep at night knowing that they were comfortable.
Yeah.
Seeing the change in how other people have worked with those clones and the accessibility has changed, where you pretty much would have to show someone that you're willing to die for them to give you a clone. Whereas that same clone now, 10 years later, can be sourced for $25 and be at your doorstep in 24 hours.
Yeah, a lot of times. There's still a lot of exclusivity out there.
There is. But
I always pronounce it Shahazarad. I don't ever see that one on clone lists.
Yeah.
Cindy 99, never.
Yep. Yeah. I guess it's what people deem, what they deem special, so they're you and I are the rarity that would see Scheherazade or Shahar, however you pronounce it.
That awesome name.
Yeah. As important enough to hold on to,
Yeah.
I will say I had a very fine line with letting them go, where I just made the decision. The ones that are extremely close to me, that I have a long history with, that I want to be reacquainted with, are in very loving homes. So it's not like I just brought them to the compost one day and said goodbye.
Right. I let flowered them all out or something.
No, I let them all go out to hopefully people who would respect them and make sure they were taken care of, who will take on the challenge that I've had for years. Right.
Yeah. And I have like a vested interest in asking this question because I have maintained a clone library of my own for, one of the clones I've held for 14 years.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man. It's been a labor of love.
I know all about it.
Yeah, you certainly did. Does it feel freeing to you to not have to?
Extremely.
Yeah, I bet.
Just like a lot of things in life where you carry I hate to use the word burden because it brings on a negative connotation, but it's just like a weight, a backpack, or something that you are responsible for. And I took on that responsibility, but that doesn't mean that when you let that responsibility go, it's not freeing or it's like letting go of my backpack. It's like wearing a backpack that's 40 pounds. And when you take it off, you forgot it was on, but you feel lighter.
I'm going to keep that in mind and see next time I walk into my veg space.
There are days where I regret it most is when something comes to mind as far as a project that I could put together.
Yeah.
Like say a male springs up from put down a good amount of seeds and a male comes up. And in my head, I say, oh man, what I wish I still had to combine with this. More so than even just flowering the girls out for the flowers. I miss having them on hand for proper combinations.
Right. Sounds like you can get them back though, huh?
The good ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. Very cool. What's the longest you've ever held a cutting for? Because it seems like in today's market, people are always looking for the newest hype cut. So I guess sub-question to that is, how important do you think it is for us to preserve the foundation strains of a lot of these modern hybrids and polyhybrids?
Great question. Yeah, the longest strain I've ever held was probably Sour Diesel, just because it was really one of the first clones that I was ever gifted. So it gave me the opportunity to hold it the longest. Then I've held what they can call the Maine Super Skunk, the Mess clone, for a good amount of years for a close friend. That was another one that, passed, I think it was 12 or 13 years. So those are the ones. And then a lot of others kind of fell into that. 5 or 6 years ago, I was taking in a lot more girls that they were on that list of not sure if they were going to be around, so I wanted to make sure they would be.
Yeah, that Mass Super Skunk or the Maine Super Skunk. It's a legendary one. That's definitely a foundation stone.
You got it.
For today's modern growers, though, you think it's important for them to try to make selections or get some of these old school cuts and maintain them? Or are you seeing that maybe for the average home grower, it might be easier just for them to, get a 10-pack and then go ahead and flower out the males, or females call out the males?
Yeah, it's a very layered question as far as in an ideal world, I would love for any grower out there who wanted access to a clone that was on his or her list to have access to grow out, to be able to do it and for it to show its best version of itself for them and for them to enjoy it. Sadly, the odds of that happening in today's world are just really slim, because a lot of the clones that we fell in love with over the years just really don't show the same version of themselves these days, based on their either mishandling or they're putting their energy in the wrong spot.
There's so many great strains that come from Maine or the East Coast. Some of the best definitely have connections to Maine. You got Chem D, you got the Maine Super Skunk, Sour Diesel. East Coast wise, there's a lot of famous strains that have come from the East Side. So a lot of the haze work too. Can't overlook that. Among these, do you have a favorite old school East Coast or Maine strain that you love to smoke or you love to grow?
Oh yeah, I probably have a long list of East Coast. Well, it's probably easier for me to just keep it, Northeast varieties. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Chem Dogs and a lot of the Diesels is where I kind of see it as a line in the sand as far as me learning. I spent a lot of my time searching further than I needed to and not realizing how surrounded I was by unbelievable weed, So the Diesels and the Chem Dogs were the first time I was in my home area being introduced to herb that shattered everything I saw thousands of miles away. And I had traveled to Europe, I had traveled the country, always on the search for the best herb, mostly. I liked music and I liked traveling and all that, but generally all of my travel was triggered by cannabis and going to places where the culture was more progressive than where I was, supposedly. Right. Little did I know that in my own backyard, there were some people just a little bit older than me that were already smoking on things like Chem Dog and all of the different varieties of Chem Dog and the Diesels. So when I was introduced to them, my eyes got opened, and I also started to gain a way newfound respect for the area I was raised in and the roots that we have with the plant.
Definitely, man. Yeah. I feel like Maine is kind of unsung, nationally in regards to cannabis. I feel like we're starting to get more recognition on Instagram and social media platforms. People are kind of being like, oh shit, actually those guys are really holding it down, and they have been for years.
Yep.
And it's fine that we haven't got the recognition. I feel like that's like a Maine ethos. You're
taking the words out of my mouth.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
It's only fitting.
Right. Yeah. We're kind of in the woodwork, and it's kind of woodsy up here.
Yeah. And there's different versions of welcoming,
Yes.
And it's like, welcoming isn't always based on a sale, where, like I mentioned before when we were speaking before we plugged in, some of the spots that we thought were the most supportive and welcoming of cannabis were actually just most welcoming to catch a buck.
Yeah.
I don't see Maine as that.
No. In some regards, maybe, but yeah, I think it's a who state.
Yep.
Once you know the right people, there's just some amazing doors that open.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I like the accountability that comes along with the people in this state, where it's not a place where you're going to get away with your words. It's a spot where your actions are going to make your connections, and they're going to keep you supported and held up,
Well said. Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. Because people like to talk a lot, and that happens, it's part of communication, but yeah, backing it up and your actions. Yeah.
And even cultures and businesses that are extremely successful, in quotes, successful, as far as their house is built on sticks, as far as they may not be able to turn around and walk back across the bridges that they've crossed. They may not have that support system. They may have things that, we may not have as far as in financial gains or pushing of certain brands or progression of culture in little pockets. Like California is a great example. But you can see when tough times come, a lot of those companies vanish and they're not supported. They get beaten down and,
Yeah. Yeah. I love this state. Sounds like you do too.
Yes, sir.
Nice. Yeah. Sometimes it's pleasant to just sit down and grin to yourself while you observe.
Yes. And it's fun to do that when the plants are sitting there doing it with you.
The next time you're on WeedMaps, type in All Kind and give them a follow. All Kind is a medical caregiver storefront in downtown Portland, Maine, specializing in finely crafted infused Belgian chocolate and other tasty cannabis edibles and products. We are proudly supported by All Kind and personally love their high-quality products. Check them out at allkind.buzz on Instagram or go to their website allkind.buzz to check out their great selection. Listeners of the show receive a 10% discount by mentioning In the Trees Podcast to your bud tender at All Kind. Man, what a treat to hear Sean's perspective on growing and breeding. Such a cool guy and super knowledgeable. We will be airing part 2 of Melting Pot Farm interview on the July 14th episode. Make sure you're following us on social media so you don't miss it. He offers up some more great perspectives on his approach to growing, as well as modern cannabis strains. Also, don't forget to follow Sean on Instagram at Melting Pot Farm and Medical Cannabis Patients. Don't miss the opportunity to check out some of his expertly crafted flower at fine caregiver stores like Sensimilla 207 in Lewiston, Maine. For any comments or other questions you might have about this episode and links to everything we've discussed, head over and drop us a message at inthetreespodcast.com or at In the Trees Podcast on Instagram.
They say experience teacheth wisdom.
It's time for a Stoney Story. This is the part of the show where you, the listener, gets to enjoy a story told to you by one of the Stoney guests here on the show. Stoney Stories are recorded here in the Alight studio after a feature we call Spontaneous Combustion, where guests of the show get irie and give their thoughts on some cannabis, extract, or other product. The effects from those sessions are the catalyst for the stories you will be hearing. For our first Stoney Story, I am happy to introduce you to my good friend and Alight Farms business partner, Wanchuck, or at farmer.wan.love on Instagram. This Stoney Story was a result of a spontaneous combustion session where Farmer Wan enjoyed a joint of fellow Maine grower Bungludetch's Fire Mandelbreath flower. Look for Wan's spontaneous combustion feature in a future episode where he gives his lowdown on the Mandelbreath. For now, turn up the volume and listen closely, as this is his Stoney Story. Enjoy.
One good thing about cannabis I love is it makes me laugh, and sometimes it makes me laugh uncontrollably, just like what the it's just you get this. It's like something happens in your stomach and it can't stop, and it's just like the muscles are just going like ha 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 ha. A few days back, I read an article. The headlines just cracked me up. I was just like, I went back. I can't remember the exact headlines, but basically the gist of it was something to do with COVID-19 times. So I think it was Venezuela, the country Venezuela, and it had to do with their navy. So basically there was a tourist cruise ship. I may be a little bit off on the exact details, but there's some kind of a cruise ship, and the Venezuelan government didn't want them to come for whatever reasons, and the Venezuelan Navy has probably a ship that's strong, it's armored, it's whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's the cruise ship. So basically the headline said something to the effect of the Venezuelan Navy rams the cruise ship. They must have given their warning saying, hey, don't come into our waters or whatever, stay back or whatever. And then they're like, all right, sure, you're not going to listen. So then the Navy, they rammed the cruise ship, and then the Navy ship sank.
Oh,
Dude, I'm sorry. I'm not, but you can. That was the headlines, and that killed me. I was just like, that was a funny headline. I was like, the Navy ship rammed the cruise ship, and then it sank.
That's ridiculous.
Again, guys, if you're listening to this, I'm not making fun of the Navy. It's just the headlines. It just sounded funny. It's like we weren't accepting that. But hey, again, maybe if I was not smoking this wonderful medicine, cannabis, maybe it wouldn't have been as funny. I would just be like, dude. Maybe they should have made that ship a little bit stronger.
Right.
The Navy ship. I would have been like, I don't think that was a tourist cruise ship. I think they're covering something up.
Right.
If I wasn't smoking cannabis. But since I was smoking cannabis, I was just like, dude, I'm dying right now. Like the Venezuelan Navy rammed into a tourist cruise ship and it sank.
Right.
Not
the Navy
not
sank.
The Navy.
Stoney Stories are brought to you by Frass Valley. Frass Valley is an organic superworm-based garden amendment that I personally have used a bunch in my garden. It has a balanced NPK ratio and a lab-tested level of keton at 16.9%. This means that it aids your plant in building its immune system, increasing beneficial microorganisms and mycorrhiza in your soil, while also discouraging soil-borne insects who might be looking to prey on your garden. If you are looking for an amendment that will help you grow strong plants, check them out at Frass Valley on Instagram or go to their website frassvalley.com to order some today. Listeners of the show receive 10% off their orders by using the code words INTHETREES at checkout. Wait till you see what Frass Valley's Superworm Frass can do for your garden. All right, I want to thank you all for tuning in to this first episode. I also want to say that I am absolutely stoked to be your host on the In the Trees podcast. I want to give a huge shout out to this episode's guests, Farmer Wan and Sean at Melting Pot Farm. Shout out to our sponsors, All Kind, the Maine Cannabis Chronicle, and Frass Valley. I want to shout out OG Cushion and Kush Kitten for all their crucial help, and to my 12-year-old son for creating killer beats for the show. I love you, my little lion. Big love and respect to my wife and 2-year-old son for all their love and support. And an immense amount of gratitude goes out to the great and wonderful Crash Berry, who has contributed to making this first episode and show a success. Stay tuned next time for more In the Trees podcast. Please visit our website, inthetreespodcast.com, for bonus audio and video content, including more Stoney stories and behind-the-scenes features unaired on the show. You can also look us up on YouTube and follow us on Instagram at In the Trees Podcast. If you would like to show In the Trees even more love and support, look us up on Patreon under In the Trees Podcast and feel free to donate to the show. In the Trees Podcast is a labor of love by the great audiophile OG Cushion, the lovely web designer Kush Kitten, and myself to provide a quality show for listeners like you. We are so grateful for your Patreon support because it allows us to continue providing fun and educational podcast episodes like the one you just listened to, and maybe get some better mics and stuff for the studio. Apart from having access to a ton of behind-the-scenes audio and video, including raw cuts of myself talking like a pirate, Patreon supporters also get the opportunity to score a pack of cannabis seeds for sprinkling on your salad or feeding your cockatiel.